Hello, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us for the webinar today. To start things off, I'm going to turn the reins over to James Butler, Family Assistance Program Specialist for the Office of Family Assistance. James?
Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Post-Employment Services and Strategies for Tanf Programs. We are delighted to have a panel of expert presenters for you today to discuss some critical topics with you. So as Steve said, I will be facilitating today's webinar. So I'd like to start off by giving you just a little bit of information. The Department of Education defines post-employment services as services that are provided subsequent to the achievement of an employment outcome and that are necessary for an individual to maintain, regain, or advance in employment consistent with the individual's strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, and informed choice. These services vary across states and programs depending on the needs of the TANF participants. The goal being to help keep families who have already achieved employment on the path to achieving self-sufficiency. As highlighted in an Urban Institute paper, many TANF recipients can and do work. However, they tend to obtain low-skill, low-wage jobs with little room for advancement and usually experience difficulty retaining those jobs. Post-employment education, training, and supportive services are one strategy toward TANF families sustaining long-term employment and occupational advancement that will put them above the poverty level. Jurisdictions have significant flexibility with that and are able to offer as post-employment support from extended or ongoing case managers to the provision of child care, transportation, and work-related expenses outside referrals. Many states also use the earned income disregard as a strategy to both encourage paid work and keep work recipients on the TANF caseload and part of the work participation rate. So during today's webinar, our wonderful host of presenters will share how they support TANF participants through a variety of post-employment services and strategies. Some of our objectives for today's webinar is that we hope that you will consider some strategies and resources for supporting TANF participants through their transition from work to self-sufficiency, review different approaches in determining eligibility and length of support for TANF post-employment services, reflect on your own program's approach to post-employment support and how those provisions of ongoing assistance to former TANF recipients in low-wage jobs improve employment outcomes. As mentioned, we are very delighted to have three dynamic presenters today who will be guiding our conversation. First, we will hear from Dr. Pamela Forrest, who is a labor economist and senior fellow at the Urban Institute. For more than 2 decades, she has conducted research on ways to enhance the economic well-being of disadvantaged persons through work, including removing barriers to work, improving skills, and provision of work support benefits. She currently leads evaluating the Health Professions Opportunity Grants, which is HPOG, which is providing training in a career pathway model to TANF participants, or recipients rather, and other low-income individuals. Her work on this project includes analysis of career pathways in healthcare for entry-level workers, including opportunities for earnings growth. She also is co-directing work for the J.P. Morgan Chase Foundation, where she assesses their New Skills at Work initiative, which is focused on improving middle-skill work opportunities for less skilled workers. Her prior research includes analysis of the demand side of the less skilled labor market, which surveyed employees about their labor market needs and connections with programs providing post-employment supports. Some of her past work, she also analyzed the challenges to work and potential solutions for former TANF recipients and single mothers who are disconnected from work and welfare. After hearing from Pamela, we will hear from the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services, Human and Community Services Division, Jamie Pelagi, who is the Administrator of Human and Community Services Division at the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. She's responsible for managing safety net programs for the state of Montana, with offices across the state. In addition to managing those, she manages over 500 staff and a multi-million-dollar budget. She is an executive leader who works with stakeholders and colleagues across Montana to ensure hungry people have food on their table, working families have high-quality child care, and folks have health care coverage, and citizens can go to bed each night in warm homes. After hearing from Jamie, we will hear from David Crocin, who is the Associate Administrator responsible for the IT and data collection supporting the safety net programs in Montana. David joined the department in 2010, where he provided public assistance services in Cascade County. He's currently working to implement the Service First principles in the division and leads work on information technology solutions for public assistance. After hearing from David, we will hear from Stephanie Wilkins. She is the program manager for the Montana Temporary Assistance for Needy Families with Montana DPHHS. Prior to joining Montana's Department of Social Services, she served 6 years in management and marketing of a nonprofit cooperative for rural Montanans. In addition, she has extensive experience serving as the Chief Executive Officer of Wilkins Incorporated. Over the past 10 years, she served in various roles within Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services, where she began her career specializing in case management and direct client services. Then we will hear from David Stillman, who is the Assistant Secretary for Economic Services at the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. David is the Assistant Secretary of the Economic Services Administration in Washington State's Department of Social and Health Services, where he is responsible for a number of Washington's public assistance programs, including Work First, TANF, Basic SNAP, Food SNAP, Child Care, Eligibility, Refugee and Immigrant Assistance, and Aged and Disability Determination Services for Social Security benefits. So throughout this presentation, you will have an opportunity to ask questions through the chat box in the bottom left corner of your screen. We encourage you to ask questions, and if your question is for a specific presenter or program, please be sure to specify that. If we don't get to everyone's question, we will provide a Q&A that will appear on the PRTA website, along with a transcript and audio recording of today's webinar. During the webinar, there will be a series of polling questions that will appear on your screen, and we ask that you please answer each by clicking on the radio button next to your selected response. Doing so will not only help us guide the discussion, but it will also share some additional information that we may use to inform your practice. So we will go ahead now and start out with our first polling question, and Steve will read that polling question to you.
Thanks, James. So our first polling question is, does your TANF program currently offer post-employment services for TANF participants? We'll give a few moments for you to respond. All right, so for the initial response, looks like the majority of you do offer post-employment services. So as we go further into the presentation, we'll ask for some more information about the type of services you offer. So for now, I will turn the presentation over to Pamela Forrest from the Urban Institute. Pamela?
Thank you. I'm just waiting for the slide to come up. Thank you, everyone. I'm, as was introduced, a researcher at the Urban Institute, and so I'm going to provide some research context on what we know about post-employment supports, mainly for TANF recipients, but some of the research has included individuals who are low income, low skill, single parents, or other groups that are similar in some ways to TANF recipients that may provide lessons that are important. Why are post-employment supports important? Well, it's both to move up from low-wage entry-level jobs. As I said, the research shows that most of the jobs TANF recipients get right off of TANF are low-wage. Many TANF recipients have low levels of education or skills, and so they enter into entry-level to gain experience and then hopefully to be able to move up. But there's also post-employment supports to help retain that employment. The research shows that there's high levels of turnover, not just for TANF recipients, but in entry-level jobs in general. The instability in low-skills workers' employment is even higher among TANF recipients, former recipients. So in order to try and stabilize that work, post-employment supports may be helpful. The Work Investment Opportunities Act programs use a 3-month performance milestone to look at keeping individuals in work for 3 months. 3 months is a common time frame that we look at to try and keep people in a job to promote stability. That's a common marker. Next slide. So there are a number of types of post-employment interventions that programs have implemented and that have been assessed in the research. They really span a gamut of different types of interventions. And I'm going to just read through the list and talk a little bit about these. Wage subsidies, which are a subsidy to the wage that the employer is paying. This could be a private sector employer that in a transitional job type program that provides subsidies and incentive for employers to hire individuals. It can be temporary or it can be a longer term. Ongoing education and training, of course, while individuals are employed or after an initial employment in an entry-level job to help people move up and gain greater skills and higher earnings. To that end, there's supports of career navigation and counseling that help individuals who have found entry-level work figure out what next steps could be and what pathways might be open to them. And then there's coaching and intensive case management, which even more so helps individuals figure out how to gain access to support services that might be available or that they might need in order to support their continued work or continued education and training. Some of the post-employment supports are provided at the workplace, where our programs work with employers to provide, it could be worksite visits, could be peer support groups with workers at that site or with workers, individuals, former TANF recipients, say, from other employers, and the employer supports that help the employer themselves, training and assistance to the employer on how to work with these former TANF recipients to help with retention. All of those kinds of services are provided by different programs at the workplace. Next type of service is a financial incentive, and this can be a direct payment or a bonus to individuals who retain work for a certain amount of time in order to provide an incentive for that stability in the job. And then reemployment services are services that are provided to someone who's working in an entry-level job to help them find a next step job, to move up the scale once they've gotten some experience and being able to advance in earnings. Next slide. So there's been a number of rigorous research efforts to look at some of the impacts of these different modes of doing post-employment. One large effort was the Retention and Advancement Project, funded by the Department of Health and Human Services, with 16 different program models in 8 different states in the early 2000s. This effort used rigorous experimental random control trial methods and followed for 3 to 4 years to really understand the impact on employment and earnings. Most of the interventions targeted current or former TANF recipients, although some included some additional groups. These different models implemented a range of post-employment interventions, and the idea was to try and understand the impacts of different types of models. Positive impacts were found in 3 out of the 16 sites. Some of the other sites ended up having an inconclusive result, that there wasn't enough, either there wasn't enough sample or the differences between the treatment and control were not significant. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about those models that had positive impacts. Next slide. They were really 3 very different kinds of models, so it's interesting to see that they had that different ways of doing post-employment supports had positive impacts. The first provided financial incentives, a monthly stipend of $200 to those who consistently worked 30 or more hours per week. This model also included post-employment services offered by a community-based organization to help individuals if they were having issues that might have affected their retention, things like car trouble or transportation issues, childcare issues, or other kinds of on-the-job issues that they needed some interventions. So there was the post-employment services as well as the financial incentives. Another model focused on employment services, and this was the type of service I spoke about in terms of helping participants move up into better jobs while they're employed. This service was offered by a for-profit private placement firm that had strong employer ties and a lot of history of working with TANF recipients or former TANF recipients, similar populations, and doing employer matching, trying to find jobs that fit that individual so that they can move up to increase earnings. The third model was a comprehensive service model offered by a community-based organization in partnership with a community college that provided reemployment activities, career development services, and this connection to education and training, ways to improve the skill set to be able to move up to better jobs. This kind of combination of some intensive individualized services and availability of training also led to positive impacts on earnings. Next slide. The overall lessons that were learned from the employment retention that really we see repeated in other research around the post-employment supports are that engaging individuals in the post-employment services was a consistent challenge. Once recipients leave TANF and are employed and have no longer necessarily have a formal contact with the program, there is difficulty in engaging individuals in the services that were offered. And in some cases, this low engagement was why we saw no positive impact on earnings. Rates of job loss were very high. As we said before, in research we found TANF recipients' high level of turnover in initial entry-level jobs. This required some of the program operators to provide more work on just finding individuals additional new entry-level jobs versus focusing on the other kinds of reemployment services they were offering. Programs also found that they needed specific skilled staff to provide the retention services that weren't necessarily the skills that the TANF program operators, TANF staff had already. And sometimes this was the reason that programs used community-based organizations or other organizations that had staff with the skill, like in the rapid employment, reemployment, or working with employers. Supporting employment stability is likely to be a more effective strategy than encouraging job stability. What this means is, rather than focusing on retaining an individual in a specific job, an overall strategy of making sure the person has employment stability, maybe in multiple jobs, was found to be more effective. In other words, it's positive to help people leave an entry-level job and move up to another job, and that kind of a focus had positive impacts. Whereas just focusing on retaining for longer periods in the initial entry-level job was more difficult. The results, as I said, the earning supplements tied to job retention had positive impacts, and especially when coupled with other supports, job coaching, and more intensive kind of post-employment supports. And then the result found that programs that by themselves just had counseling and referrals to services post-employment or after leaving TANF and employed in entry-level jobs did not appear to increase employment retention or advancement. Next slide. Other research has also looked at models of worker retention and post-employment retention and advancement kinds of interventions. This demonstration by the Department of Labor in 3 sites found some of the similar findings to the ERA experiment, including it was hard to recruit TANF volunteers for post-employment services, hard to engage, difficult employers as partners in employer-based retention services for models that were trying to serve the employers. They found it was easiest to connect with employers who already had high turnover and saw that as an issue. Providing services for a career advancement, of course, was costly and intensive on staff time, and that's something that needs to be built in and thought about in doing these programs. Next slide. I just, in the next couple of slides, list some of the additional research that's out there on different models of post-employment support. First is on transitional jobs and waived subsidies. There is some evidence that they can affect employment longer term beyond the transitional job itself. During the recession, the ARA programs found some impacts of traditional jobs and wage subsidies. For this reason, both the Department of Labor and the Department of Health and Human Services are funding large-scale rigorous evaluations of transitional job programs to find out what impacts those might have in the current environment. So those are ongoing. Next slide. There's also a lot of work being done on career advancement under the career pathways models. The idea of thinking about someone's progression to higher earnings being not just finding one job, but finding an entry-level job, maybe additional skills and moving on to additional higher paying jobs. So thinking about it as a pathway. And with that, the receipt of credentials that maybe open up employment opportunities. There's a number of different evaluations going on right now of career pathway programs to understand better what the impact is of the structure of different ones of these programs, but there is some promising efforts in that direction. Next. So in conclusion, from the research, there is evidence of successful post-employment interventions, but it does vary across the model of intervention. There do seem to be issues in getting individuals involved, and that's something to consider and think about how best to do that in any post-employment program. You need the staff to carry out the services who have the skills if that match what you're trying to do, working with employers or providing reemployment type activities. And evaluations of some additional options are ongoing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pamela. So here we have our second poll question of the day. And the question is, how did your Tanf program connect participants to post-employment services? And the options are, our Tanf program does not currently offer post-employment services. We refer participants to partners off-site that can provide post-employment services. We offer post-employment services on-site, and that may include having partners that provide services on-site. And then we offer post-employment services on-site as well as off-site at partner locations. So we'll give you a chance to weigh in on this particular poll. All right. Wow, that's a really close distribution among all of the options. So it should be interesting to see moving forward the different questions that you provide in response to the presentations. So at this point, we will turn the program over to the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services.
Thank you. This is Jamie Pelagi, the administrator for the Human and Community Services Division. I'll wait for the slides to catch up. Okay, so jumping into the next slide, we're going to spend some time just providing a little bit of context on what's going on in Montana related to the Tanf program as a whole, and then we'll jump to the post-employment work that we have in place. So for Montana, we began a strategic plan in 2014 and have been implementing that plan since then, with the bulk of the implementation being completed last fall. Now we're in the stage of evaluating if our plan is working and the services are meeting the needs of the people, of the clients. So for Montana's Tanf program, we have three primary goals. One, that families are stable, able to work, and financially secure. As we were building the strategic plan, we brought in a variety of stakeholders. We conducted focus groups and really engaged with current and past Tanf client recipients to help us redesign our model to make sure that we were able to really support families in a continuum of services from the beginning to the end, helping them get to a place where they could say they are stable, able to work, and financially secure. We had the good fortune of benefiting from research from some of the other states across the nation, and we looked at some national best and promising practices, spent time with some other leaders in this area, and then really kind of dove in, focusing on family needs and what we can do. So our TANF model has just begun. We're in the infancy stage around 2-generational work, but our framework focuses on the entire need of the family if that helps the individual get to work and do the things that they need to do. We spent time looking at what success looks like, and then we redesigned our policies, procedures, and computer system and service delivery model to meet that need. Next slide. So just real quickly, the elements of the new model. I would say that Montana partners with public and private contractors to deliver this work. We do contractors such as Department of Labor and Industry, community action agencies, and then other community level service providers across the state. In the model, a pretty intense piece of the work is client advocacy. So our philosophy is that clients are able to make decisions around their future and sometimes just need a little help to assess where they're currently at and then set goals to move forward. Client advocates spend time in depth with clients over the course of time at various stages in their journey to make sure that we're offering them the support. They may engage in brokering of services and or referring services in communities, making sure that if there are other funded models that can support a client, we take advantage of those first before applying TANF funds. We also combined our cash assistance and non-cash assistance services into one package of services to provide support over time to really make sure that the family is able to start with us and maybe then not come back on TANF when they've ended their time with us. Most significantly, we implemented a bridge model in Montana, taking some pieces from other states, the Crittenton Bridge model, et cetera, designed it for Montana. And this model, next slide, I realize that this is very tiny and we'd be happy to send information out to you, but this model, just to describe it, across the top are the 3 main areas of family stability, employability, and then financial security. You can see it sort of. And within each of those broad categories are subcategories that add to it. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that there's a rating scale to help an individual assess where they might be. And so we believe that if you're engaged with us and all of the supports for TANF, that we should be able to at least make sure that you've met the stability thresholds which go along the bottom of the chart. This model is used to assess where clients and families are. It's used to help with goal planning and next steps and build a plan to support the need of the family. And then it's also used to track outcomes at the individual level, the community service provider level, and then statewide. So we wanted to give a little bit of context because as we did this work, we made some adjustments to our post-employment program. And since that's the focus of the day, I'm happy to turn it over to our TANF manager to talk more specifically about the post-employment program in Montana.
Thank you, Jamie. This is Stephanie Wilkins, the TANF program manager, as Jamie said. Next slide, please. And then one more. So I'm going to talk about our new post-employment program. As Jamie discussed, we did have a strategic plan, and we had a committee that helped make some recommendations. Some of the recommendations for our post-employment program was to extend the program to help support families longer as they transition off TANF cash and move into that employment, to help families, to support families going off of cash, including child care copays at $10 during post-employment, and to really support them longer term with client advocacy, some budgeting and financial literacy, and job coaching as well. In addition to the strategic plan recommendations, we considered feedback from our employment and training contractors, whom we call pathways contractors. And what we heard from them is that we needed to provide a smaller benefit longer term, hopefully to prevent dependence on the benefit and to help reduce that cliff effect. We didn't want a time clock. We heard a lot of feedback stating that clients didn't want to go on into the post-employment program because they only had 1 or 2 months of their time clock left, and they wanted to save those months in case the job didn't work out or there was another crisis that happened in their family. So we're not taking a time clock during post-employment. And again, as I said, client advocacy. We're really focusing on that, helping with budgeting, financial literacy, really working with clients to understand when you get increased income that the SNAP benefits are going to decrease, your child care may increase, your rent will increase, and really preparing them for that. Next slide. To be eligible for our post-employment program, of course, you have to be in receipt of Tanf cash. You must be losing eligibility to new or increased earned income. We do not have an hourly limit. You do not have to work a minimum number of hours. You just have to have income that no longer makes you eligible for Tanf cash. In Montana, we have a low income level. It's 30% of the 2011 federal poverty level. And to give you an idea, a household size of 3 is $1,092 gross income. And then after some work disregards, it's only $463 a month. They must report and verify their income timely within 10 days. They must have an current employability service plan, and of course meet all non-financial and other financial eligibility requirements, and be in compliance with child support enforcement. Next screen. The benefits and services that our clients can see in our post-employment program as we auto-enroll them. I heard earlier that some of the data showed out of Pamela's screens that it was challenging to get clients to participate in the post-employment program. We're finding that if we auto-enroll them into the program, they don't have to do anything. It's just a seamless process for them, so we're having a little more better participation in the program. We disregard 100% of earned and unearned income. And of course, their hours of employment count towards the required state hours of participation in the program. We continue their child care at $10 co-payments. And where we really see a lot of participation is continuing supportive services as best we can, up to $1,250 per state fiscal year to help with employment-related needs. The other thing we did is we allow them to receive up to 12 months of post-employment, and they can transition between post-employment and Tanf cash a couple of times during that 12-month period, providing there's a need for that. That kind of helps. There's a lot of high turnover in those entry-level jobs and for Tanf clients, and that really helps support them, multiple times as they try to enter into the workforce. We do provide a work pays bonus of $300 in months 1, 7, and 12, as long as the income's been verified. And then we also provide an ongoing monthly benefit of $100 per month that gradually decreases after month 6 down to $50 a month. Next slide. So just to give you, this isn't our first post-employment program. We started our first one in July of 2008, and it was only a 3-month-long program. It was $375, $275, and $175 per month with no bonuses. And what we found that program lacked is we did see a lot of recidivism in months 1 and 2. As Pamela indicated, there is high turnover in those entry-level jobs. We have a lot of instability in those lower skilled workers. They have a lot of barriers, and the rural nature of Montana, we saw a lot of transportation and child care issues in some of our rural communities. So they were coming back onto Tanf cash quite quickly. We also noticed that the 3 months of support was not enough time to get clients past their probation period to then engage them in longer in additional education or training, or to get higher credentials for increased wages or increased hours. And we weren't supporting clients long enough with the cliff effect. We weren't helping them with budgeting and preparing for those decreased SNAP benefits and increase in other expenses. And of course, the client advocacy was not as strong. We didn't provide as much contact and availability to those supports through our employment and training contractors. So as I stated, our new program started in 2016, and we've extended it to 12 months, and we're seeing some very exciting data and some excellent participation in the program. So with that, I'll pass it off to David.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I don't have several slides to show outcome data, obviously because the program right now is still in its infancy. If this was a year down the road, there would hopefully be some information that would show we're moving the needle in the right direction. But what I did want to at least talk about a little is the data model that we have created related to the new Tanf program and post-employment. The evaluation model that we do have planned and are beginning to watch dashboards and collect data related to is some of the standard things around how much did we do, how well did we do it, and did it actually make an impact. But also the new data model within our data collection system itself, we are capturing individual level information that we have not had before around referring and brokering services. As Jamie showed, the bridge model captures a barrier rating scale, and that is being actually captured within our data collection system at initial enrollment and then every 30 to 60 days after that, so that we can begin to understand the areas of the plan with the client, with the employment-related plan, to see where individuals come in and how far they're able to move to becoming stable, able to work, and financially secure. We've added costs related to brokering and referring services so that we can understand the full cost of a TANF client as they transition through the program, because there are a lot of questions, whether that's from our legislative body, our own internal questioning around does this model work and how much does it cost to hopefully eventually move a family off of TANF and into full-time employment. And then we're going to be capturing information related to income at exit, and we will be doing DLI matches, so Department of Labor matches at 6, 12, and 18 months, so that we can understand long-term a client that follows this path, how well they're able to re-engage out into the employment world. Okay. With that, we'll turn it back to you, James.
Thank you all. So now we'll go into our third poll question. And we want to give you all a chance to weigh in on the type of post-employment services that are available to TANF participants either through your TANF program directly or through partners that provide the services. And some of your options include on-the-job education and or training, referral to community-based education and training resources, additional career planning or counseling, supportive services to address barriers to long-term employment, and continuation of public assistance benefits such as transitional assistance, child care, or SNAP. So we will give you an opportunity to select, and feel free to check all that apply to your particular program. And we'll give you a little time to weigh in on that. All right, and as you can see, continuation of public assistance benefits seems to be the most prevalent post-employment services that is provided, but there's a variety of other services as well. So now we'd like to turn over the presentation to David Stillman. David?
Well, thank you very much, and I feel like you should probably just go ahead and jump to the next slide. Good morning or afternoon, folks. I'm David Stillman. I work at the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services, and as was mentioned earlier, have the privilege of leading our Work First and Tanf programs. But I want to take a special note of inclusion of our refugee and immigrant assistance programs, our limited English proficiency programs, and also our 4D child support programs, because I'll be mentioning them either in greater detail later in the presentation or even by reference. You're on the call because we all feel that there's both a need and an opportunity to provide post-employment supports for our TANF clients to ensure their long-term self-sufficiency and success. And I think we do that because we recognize that it's often easier to help a client get a job than to retain that employment, and looking at new ways to build foundational activities and services into either a pathway or continuum in support of our innovative programs and services is really the way to long-term success. In Washington, we kind of have a little bit of a mantra that I often reference, which is our focus is to help our clients get a job, keep a job, and earn more money. And that has helped us focus on how we can improve our work with TANF clients and SNAP clients pre-employment to provide that scaffolding that helps contribute to the success upon exit, and also how to leverage our other programs. And in fact, we've built some articulated partnerships with the broader workforce system, the WIOA system, so that we can transition our clients into those programs and provide those post-employment supports. And we're also anxious to be able to use those entry points in the workforce development system, the WIOA services, as a way to help connect clients at large inside those systems that aren't accessing our public assistance programs, not necessarily the cash programs, but how can we connect them to the other supports that we have so that we build a reciprocal relationship between the systems. In fact, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I want to jump to the next slide. Here is a list of the programs and strategies that we're focusing on. I'll go into a little bit more detail, but the WIOA TANF Partnership and Alignment, our SNAP Employment and Training, Basic Food Employment and Training in Washington, we're very proud of and think we have one of the premier programs in the country in this area. We also were fortunate to be a recipient of one of the SNAP Education and Training Pilot demonstration programs. I'll talk a bit about our resources to initiate successful employment, cover a couple of pieces around our limited English proficiency pathway, and reference our refugee and immigrant assistance programs. Probably spend bulk of the time around what I think is one of the gems of our program in the employment pipeline, and then finish up by talking a little bit more about our Systems to Family Stability Policy Academy. Just making that list makes my head spin a little bit, just because we're just doing a lot. But what I appreciate about the fact that we're doing a lot is that they are all aligned, all aimed at helping our clients access, acquire, build the tools and resources they need to build better lives, but also, as I said before, to get a job, keep a job, and earn more money. So next slide. The WIOA and TANF relationship, I think, is important to make note of, because at least here in Washington, I know we're among maybe not a handful of states, slightly more than that, maybe two handfuls of states that have made the decision to have our TANF program and our SNAP program participate in the WIOA combined state plan. Here that's called Talent and Prosperity for All. And our vision is to, and actually we're well along, it's more than a vision, we're now well into the planning and development of an integrated service delivery model. Of course, I can use the buzzwords of focusing on a client-centered approach, but where that begins is with the establishment of a common intake process and a common intake functionality, technology to support that, so that we can, from the initial intake into any of our programs, through entry to employment and career and wage progression, maintain a working relationship across our systems. We're almost done. I think I would say the paperwork's probably done, but we're almost done with the logistics around the memorandums of understanding that need to be in place for our one-stop system. In some cases, that is, of course, physical one-stops, but we're also trying to focus on how we do virtual one-stops so that clients throughout the state of Washington, again, can experience the benefit of a common intake process. As part of the WIO implementation, our state workforce board had convened 6 subcommittees with all the core program partners, and we're excited to see that, I guess, be leveraged over time and transition all of our clients, whether they're a TANF client or not, into the programs and services that provide post-employment supports across the board. I'm going to jump to the next slide. I've added this slide here to talk a little bit about our Basic Food Employment and Training Program. I'm proud of our program. We have the program is available in every single one, or supported by work that's done in every single one of our 30-plus community colleges and vocational institutions across the state. We also, I think, are benefited by the fact that we're able to track wages and retention numbers. Former Basic Food Employment and Training participants are followed for several quarters after they exit the program. This current information shows exiters from the fourth quarter of 2014 and the first quarter of 2015. About 2/3 of our BFET clients are employed after a one-year period with a median wage here of $12.82 in 2014 and $13.12 in 2015. This is something that we think is important to be able to demonstrate that the investment of the dollars through the Basic Food Employment and Training Program are both producing, as I said, the get a job and keep a job component of that mantra. Next slide. I mentioned that Washington was the beneficiary of one of the 10 SNAP education and training pilots, so while we are proud of what we've accomplished and feel like it is at the cutting edge, we also feel that it's important to think about where we go from here. And this really is about the post-employment first job, second job, third job continuum. Our goal is to fill the gap currently experienced by BFET participants who continue to face multiple barriers. I think all of us in the service delivery of public assistance recognize that simply because employment is obtained does not mean that the individual who's gotten the job has acquired either the necessary skills, necessary work experience to get to that place of self-sufficiency, nor have they necessarily addressed any of the barriers or some of the barriers that would continue to be in place, whether that's about, I guess we often talk about soft skills or work-based learning needs or physical or mental health barriers, even limited English proficiency barriers. It's really important that we not think that just merely the receipt of employment is the end of the opportunity to help our clients move forward. So we emphasize barrier reduction. We do have a standardized approach around comprehensive case management that we're bringing to bear inside the context of the grant. We continue to provide opportunities to sharpen their personal skills and are working on enhancing how we can offer SNAP recipients work-based learning activities. go ahead and jump to the next slide. I know I'm going through them quickly and look forward to talking to folks when we get to the Q&A period. I mentioned our LEP, Limited English Proficiency Pathway. This pathway is not limited to simply refugees and immigrants. However, its focus is on providing culturally and linguistically appropriate employment and ESL skills for refugees and immigrants. I think it's important, again, to make note, in Washington we have a very robust program that serves refugee and immigrants, but what we've also found is that in terms of our participation and outcomes, that we've been very successful. And again, you can see, for example, the average hourly wage at job entry, and then we look at the numbers around job retention services at 30 and 90 days. And as you might imagine, even in, well, certainly in this current environment, we also look at the placements with health benefits, and we're excited to see that the proportion of those receiving employment not only are earning at higher rates, but also in jobs that provide health benefits in support of the family. Last year, the LEP pathway, as noted on this slide, helped almost 4,800 participants gain the skills they need to secure work to earn a living for their family. I'm going to jump to the next slide. This slide provides a much more in-depth detail about a number of the programs and services we have for refugees and immigrants. Certainly the employment services, as I referenced, the LEP pathway, and English language services, ESL acquisition. We also have a program called PRIME, which provides comprehensive case management and focuses on life skills and navigating our various systems of government and school. We have some special population programs that focus on elderly individuals, refugee school impact for youth, unaccompanied minor program. Of course, we, like most, and I think all actually, refugee programs, we have health screenings and health promotion and some mental health services. And then in Washington, one of the areas that we do focus on, both through federal resources and state resources, is a program to assist newly arriving refugees and immigrants with the process of gaining their citizenship, which from a, I guess I would say from a research standpoint or a statistical standpoint, proven to show that increased earnings and increased participation in the community at large. Next slide. I'll apologize in advance on the next couple of slides about my probably running on at my enthusiasm about the employment pipeline. I have been, I guess, in the Department of Social and Health Services here in Washington for almost 30 years, and in the last few years serving in this role, leadership role with regard to the Tanf and Work First program. And I love my partners in the labor system, in our community jobs programs, in our early learning programs, and I feel like we're blessed to have such great partnerships. And yet, at the same time, one of the things that I think struck me over the last few years is how there's a great deal of I don't know, loss of effectiveness when we refer clients, our TANF clients, to the traditional workforce development partners. We get a better take-up rate if we walk them across the hall if we're in a one-stop, but if we're sending somebody to another program, there's often a second or third assessment process. Maybe the person that receives them will say, hey, it doesn't look like they're ready for work, or you know, get in a line, whether it's virtual or real, or maybe the client just doesn't make it. It's just one of those things where even around the corner, down the block, it can create some churn where clients go and come back and go and come back, and that is costly certainly to our staff, but mostly costly, deeply costly to the client and to the opportunity that they have. That's a long spiel to say that clients, I think, are often not served well by that traditional workforce development referral system. So one of the, I guess I would say, hallmarks of my approach is if it doesn't look like it's working that way, why don't we just try to do it ourselves and figure out an approach that would expedite and streamline job placement opportunities, which that's a fancy way of saying, how about we go out and find employers and see if we can help our clients get jobs directly. That is not intended to replace or overwrite or get in the swim lane of our partners at the labor exchange system, but to look at the places where they're not and connect our clients, if you will, in a continuum basis. Get a job, keep a job, earn more money. Get them connected to a job and work with the employer directly to identify what the employer's needs are, help do screening or training, help, and then post-employment help ensure that we're working on increasing the skills clients need to enhance their longer-term employability and career progression, and then provide post-employment support to follow along and support that effort to assist in job retention and progression. I'll jump to the next slide. Some of the things that we do, and I suppose that one of the key things that we do is to provide 12 months of post-employment support. Now, there was some conversation earlier, and it would be, we do, in appropriate cases, have a very small stipend that we can provide for post-employment support. It is not the continuation of assistance, but we have employer post-employment navigators that work directly with both the employer and the employee. We contact the clients on a monthly basis and as needed for specific concerns, work to resolve workplace concerns, provide assistance with benefit eligibility reviews and recertification. So, Washington is one of the states that has transitional food assistance, so that that client that is leaving TANF can continue to maintain that benefit level at the higher rate for a period of time, but then we'll work directly with the client to ensure the eligibility review is done and done timely and appropriate recertification takes place. Simultaneously, we're partnering with our 4D Division of Child Support Program, which is also part of our Economic Services Administration, to do a case review and seek possible adjustment or modification of the support order. That can work in both ways. If the family is receiving support and it's appropriate to increase the order or to seek to ask the court or an administrative law judge to increase the order, we can focus our attention there. It may also be that the obligor and the former is also the former TANF recipient, and we'll be working with them to decrease, if appropriate, their support order. And then in Washington, like many other states, we have a process for compromise or elimination, writing off of arrears balances that are owed. So it may be possible to alleviate or reduce their legal financial obligation associated with that. Also work with the client to talk about financial literacy and make referrals if appropriate. And then, as I mentioned, I think earlier, focusing on providing opportunities for work-based learning with the employer and on continuing education where appropriate. Next slide. My last couple of slides focus on the wonderful opportunity we had to be a part of the Systems to Family Stability Policy Academy. We were fortunate to be selected as one of 8 states by the Office of Family Assistance to participate in the National Policy Academy, which has the purpose to identify and test innovative strategies to create a system that helps TANF families achieve and sustain self-sufficiency. We selected 3 innovative areas to examine. The first had to do with adversity and neuroscience-informed coaching and case management. We also looked at how we might take a whole family and intergenerational approach to eliminating and reducing poverty. And then third, to focus on TANF and WIOA alignment. We also narrowed our focus in terms of participants to families who cycle on and off TANF. We've done a lot of work to understand who the families are that only come to us for very short-term lengths of stay. They are quick leavers, if you will, and there are certainly a lot of work we've done in the past about those who come onto our TANF grant and then stay, if not for the entirety of the 60 months, for quite a while. Where we wanted to look here was families who are cycling on and off and see if we could bring some attention to and provide some assistance to reduce that cycling, which the cycling is representative of, I think, in a sense, failure to have the employment and increased income stick for a sustained period of time. The other focus in terms of participants was on disconnected youth, which we, or opportunity youth, I think is another term that's used, from age 16 to 24, who are not in school nor employed. We did a really exciting approach, I think, here in Washington State. Instead of having the folks in headquarters identify their headquarters-informed, experience-informed identification of pilots, which I'm not trying to criticize that. I'm just trying to say that's a traditional approach. We took a non-traditional approach here in Washington to build our pilots and actually asked our offices in sort of a no-money RFP way to identify proposals for selection. And there were 16 pilots that were proposed across 25 offices testing new approaches. If you jump to the next slide, I will just mention a couple of them. One was done in the Wenatchee Community Service Office. Their pilot focused on providing intensive wraparound services to parents. This is those that had cycled on and off TANF. Staff were trained to understand the effects of adverse childhood experiences, the means by which clients can build executive function and resilience capacity, trained to use research-informed goal setting and case management techniques, and as part of the pilot services, our staff are now developing something called My Success Plan that will be able to apply with all parents exiting TANF. The second pilot that I'm just highlighting here focused on career and life coaching, a very intensive coaching model to working with families. This was piloted at 6 offices across the state, so not just one location. Again, coaches were trained to understand the effects of adversity and toxic stress, as well as specific models that would allow for consistency of approach. And then the coaching was executed as a partnership between the coach and the parent, with the parents working to self-identify goals, developing a plan, and taking action to achieve their goals. And that, I think, is my very quick run-through, and I'll turn it back to James and look forward to the conversation that we'll have ahead. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, David. So for this fourth poll question, this is more of a manual entry question and something we wanted the participants to think about and provide feedback on hopefully what you've gained from the webinar. So we've asked, what is one thing that you will do to strengthen the post-employment support for TANF participants in your program as a result of the webinar? So if you could, as you think about it and as we go into Q&A, if you could just enter some of your entries into the chat box, and we'll collect those and hopefully get to read a few as we move forward through questions and answers. So we have collected a few questions that have come in from all of you, and we'll begin. I believe this question is a general question for all of the speakers, so you can all feel free to chime in. This first question is, what are your suggestions for connecting post-employment services to TANF recipients once they get a job. They are often very busy and can be difficult to track down. How can we connect and get their buy-in to participate in post-employment services? So I open that up to the group. Anyone have any suggestions on recipients that get employed?
So I'm going to leap in. This is David. Are you asking us, the presenters, to do this, or the folks that are out on the okay.
No, this is for the presenters. Yes, thank you, David.
Great. Well, it's hard for me to not respond to a question when there's an opportunity to just go drone on and on. So, but I think the question of motivation really begins with the formation of a relationship during the process. I do agree, and I think Dr. LaPresse referenced it in her presentation as well, that it is challenging. Once somebody leaves our program, for example, the receipt of the Tanf Program, and is no longer on in some sort of plan that's put into place, life happens. Life gets in the way, and it can be very difficult to make the time or find the time or even be wanting to be involved in the time. And that, I think, comes back to the relationship that's built between the client and the program. So I think our approach is that we want to establish that positive working relationship at the get-go. The other part is, from a behavioral economic standpoint, if we have been successful in connecting somebody to employment, and this is where our employment pipeline, I think, comes in. If we have a good relationship and we're doing the outreach as opposed to waiting for the client to do that, then we're able to maintain that relationship and demonstrate that we're bringing value to the relationship. So that would be two things that I would identify. I suppose the third is that we do have some post-TANF receipt cash assistance that we put on in the form of, or it's not cash, it's food assistance, a small stipend that we add to that. Really a strategy that we identified for our work participation rate more than anything else in order to take advantage of the current rules that allow us to increase our WPR in that way. That does help solidify or underwrite the relationship, but it's not the be-all and end-all. It really starts with building a good relationship in the first place.
Thanks, David. Anyone else want to weigh in on the panel?
This is Stephanie Wilkins from Montana. One thing we're doing here in Montana with our new model is really focusing on the client advocacy during post-employment and building that relationship. We're making that move to reach out to the clients at minimum monthly. Most of our client advocates are reaching out to those clients who are employed at least a couple of times a month to offer services or support. And then to make sure that they know once they transition off of our post-employment program that there are other non-cash services available to them to help with advancement in their job. So if they need to get a certificate or some type of licensure or additional education, that they can access those programs after they move off of our post-employment program. And also, while they're on post-employment, of course, those monetary supports are helping keep that connection as well.
Thank you so much. All right, here is another question for the panel. Does your program track data on how many eligible TANF participants are engaged in post-employment services versus those who are not? And that's open to anyone as well.
So this is Montana. We do split I guess, the TANF population into several different buckets, from kind of a pre-light engagement, initial engagement as they enroll in the program, a more intensive engagement set of clients. We have a parent-only program here in Montana that is for grandparents, aunts, and uncles that can get a child-only grant, and we've got that split. And then we have the post-employment program that is split as well. And then on top of that, as Stephanie said, we've got the non-cash clients. So as they transition through that entire continuum, we track them and which sub-program, I guess we could call it, of TANF they're participating in.
Great, thanks. Anyone else?
So this is David. I guess I would say here that we are not as, we haven't done, I'm envious of what was just described. And I think one of the challenges that we're looking at is with such a large SNAP population in Washington, one of the things that we're not quite yet able to describe to ourselves is the percentage of current SNAP recipients that were former TANF recipients, and sort of what, you know, is there, we can do the Venn diagrams, we can figure out the percentages, but is it, were there breaks in receipt of assistance, and if so, for what periods of time, and are people churning on and off? And I just think we need to have a better understanding of the leavers, stayers, and cyclers, even in the SNAP context, so that we can get a better handle on where the entry and exit points are there as well. So I'm excited to hear that that you all are able to characterize where your clients are, and I think in Washington we want to be able to do the same so we can get a better handle on how to better serve them.
Awesome, thank you. So I think this question was directed to Pamela, came in during her presentation, and asked, do you have any more information about how post-employment services affect employment long-term?
So that's a great question. As I said, the earnings and retention and advancement research did follow people for 2 to 4 years, which was a pretty long time for evaluations to be able to follow someone. And so those that had positive results were having positive results on earnings in the 3rd or 4th year after. So that's fairly long term, although you might think of that as midterm, because we'd love to know about individuals 10 years out. There is some current work going on to try and be able to use the unemployment earnings data, or the National Directory of New Hires data at the federal level, to follow people long term and be able to look at very long term outcomes. And that's actually happening right now with some of the career progress, career pathway research that's happening. There is, Department of Health and Human Services has research out to follow up for individuals a little bit longer term frame, and hopefully we'll move that forward as well. So the short answer is most of these do not have very long term, but that kind of 2 to 4 year is where we were able to see some results, and that's, I'd say, about as long term results as we have.
Great, thank you. The next question is for the Montana group. How can employment count towards participation rate if the clients are closed or past their 60 months? How do you make that work?
This is Stephanie. In our post-employment program, we don't allow clients who've exceeded their 60-month time clock to continue benefits or services.
So it doesn't. If they were over their 60 months, it wouldn't count towards the work participation rate. But this is generally for clients who are maybe in an accelerated pathway or not needing the full 60 months to work through some of their barriers.
Okay, thank you. And for David in Washington, do you have specific participant requirements for your different programs, or is there one set of requirements that works for all programs, or do you enroll participants on a case-by-case basis?
Well, I'll try to remember that question while I try to jump back to the work participation rate question. There is, if clients who are working or engaged in work activities, but clients who are working, who are, for example, non-assistance recipients of food, can be added to both the numerator and denominator in the calculation of your work participation rate. I'm by no means the expert in terms of how that technical calculation occurs, but if you are providing that family, that household, with assistance, and in this context we provide them with stipend that's added to their food assistance, then you are, under federal law, federal regulation, allowed to add them to both your numerator and denominator. And if there's a specific state out there who would like more information about how Washington and actually many other states do this, I would encourage them to go ahead and email me, and I will do the classic connect you with the expert on my team in order to help make sure that we're providing that specific information to you, and I'm not misstating or providing erroneous information. But I do know that we leverage that as part of our strategy to continue to meet both the all-family and two-parent work participation rates, along with a number of other strategies, which include, actual work and work participation for the TANF households. As far as eligibility for specific programs, if you're a food assistance recipient, you're going to be eligible to participate in the basic food employment and training programs. And in fact, that is a place where we have it requires the voluntary interest and participation of the client. So as has I think been alluded to or mentioned a couple of times, it can be challenging to get the client or convince or engage the client in that if you're working and you have a family and you have transportation issues, and I just think about our own lives are very busy. We are our clients. We all experience the same life challenges in terms of bandwidth and time and energy and effort. So adding education or work-based training to that can be quite a challenge. To some degree, again, what I would say is it really hinges from building that relationship and thinking about a career plan, a long-term plan that allows for open entry, open exit in some of these education and training programs, credentials, short-term trainings, and opportunities for clients to participate, move in and out of those programs. And that comes with also having good relationships with our state board for community and technical colleges, community-based organizations, and other nonprofit folks that are out there. For the employment pipeline, we focus our attention on the TANF program. I again characterize our TANF families as being an ocean of resources, and so that is where we put the majority of our attention. But in an enterprise way, we've worked with our Division of Child Support through something that's called Alternative Solutions, where if a non-custodial parent doesn't have a job, it's hard for him or her to pay their child support. So the more we can do to connect them to employment and keep them employed, not only is that great for that individual and any other kids that that individual may be supporting, but also supports the family that's on TANF and for whom we are seeking to collect child support. We work with our JR, juvenile rehabilitation programs, and even our child welfare foster care programs to see what we can do to connect youth in those programs to employment. And one of the things that, again, the hallmark of the approach that we've taken is to say, you know, our Department of Social and Health Services also has lots of jobs where we experience turnover, particularly in administrative support, maintenance mechanic, other mental health technicians, whatever the job class is. But the more we can do to educate our clients and connect them to the jobs that we have, the better off that our clients are. But it's also a great way to infuse our employee, our cadre of staff with the experience of our own clients. We can do a much more culturally appropriate, client appropriate job of serving those who come to us for help when we have in our hearts and minds the experience that ourselves through the line staff and as they progress management and leadership. So we've taken that to heart and you know, feel like that is a way to enrich our own work environment as well.
Thanks, David. Thanks for answering 2 questions. Does anyone else want to weigh in on eligibility requirements? All right. We're running short on time, but I want to see if I can squeeze another question in. This is for the panel. If resources are limited and there are not many community partners available, are there ways to provide post-employment support with limited resources?
So this is Montana. I would say that is, you know, the story of our life, and many states could probably say the same thing. That's why for us, when we looked at the post-employment piece and we started to really look at the Tanf program, that's why we engaged in a whole new reform and strategic planning model, thinking through what other states are doing that are working, that's going well, what could we be doing, what are the highest priority things for us in order to support people, and then trying to do some cost-benefit analysis of each of the strategies. Certainly, if our resources were reduced even further, we'd have to look at these things, but we'd be using some of the data to help us make the best decisions around return on investment. There are elements that you could pull out that would maybe just be client advocacy without any of the income support. Our hunches that may or may not, that probably wouldn't have as high of a participation rate, but then the story continues, especially if they still have time on their time clock. If they lose their job or if they find greater benefit in receiving cash assistance and being on the Tanf program and not going to work, then we really aren't saving any money in the end.
Fantastic. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. So we'll move forward to the last polling question, just to see if there are particular webinar topics that you would like to see in the future. You can add those in the chat box, and then I'll turn it over to James. But while you're doing that, I'll read off a couple of the entries that we received as far as takeaways from this webinar and what participants plan to do to strengthen their post-employment services. Let's see. So we have take a look at minimizing the cliff effect, using comprehensive case management and retention-focused intervention services, phone calls to check in with employed clients, encourage referrals to Dress for Success and Professional Women's Group, talk more about planning for reduced benefits when working. Let's see. reevaluating the amount of the incentive that is currently offered, also reevaluating the idea of automatic enrollment. I plan to meet with my job developer and look at her assisting them with the My Success Plan, also look at an exit seminar to cover financial literacy. I think these are great ideas presented here and would love to do more than the current support services and job bonus payment of $100 for 3 months. And finally, develop a better relationship with local workforce development board and community-based organizations that offer career development and or career technical education services. So a lot of good ideas to move forward in strengthening post-employment services. So now I'll turn it over to James.
Thanks, Steve. And just wanted to note that you can also help us expand our network and reach a greater number of people by directing any interested colleagues from your local and state networks and agencies to our website, which you should see posted on the screen. And as mentioned earlier on in the webinar, a transcript and audio recording of today's webinar will be available on the PRTA network website. If by chance you do not get a chance to complete any requests or suggestions that you have for future webinar topics, you can also send us your ideas by email to the PRTA@icf.com. Thanks again to everyone who participated in today's webinar. Thanks again to the great panel of presenters. Please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar using the survey that will appear in a separate pop-up window once you come in the webinar. Thanks again to everyone who joined us today. We thank you for your participation and your time. And you guys enjoy the remainder of your day. Thank you so much.